Now, Terraform code is written in the hashicorp configuration language, or HCL, with files that end with a .tf file extension. Now, it's a declarative language, so this means that you describe the infrastructure that you want without describing the control flow and exactly how the infrastructure should be deployed. Terraform can launch infrastructure in a wide variety of platforms, as we've mentioned already, and it calls these platforms providers, and these include AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and the less big players such as DigitalOcean. Now, because you write code for your infrastructure, you can use any text editor to write Terraform configuration files. You can also find syntax highlighting for your preferred code editor. Just to make sure to search for HCL instead of Terraform. Now, for our purposes, I'll be using Microsoft VS Code, but you can use any text editor of your choice. Now, I'm in the terminal already, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Terraform masterclass directory. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cd into the Terraform masterclass I've just created. And inside of here, I'm going to create a main.tf file. And as we'll see later on, we can create different files to hold our configuration files. So I'm going to call this main.tf. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the project or open this directory in Microsoft VS Code. So I already have this set up. This opens my directory in VS Code. So I'm going to say yes on that one. I'm just going to make this bigger. And then I have my main.tf file. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is some Terraform settings. So with Terraform, you can configure the providers, which we're going to look at in just a moment. And you can also configure the version of Terraform that you want to run your configuration files on. So I'm going to write some code, and then we're going to explain exactly what the code is actually doing. So the first bit is to create the Terraform block. So this is going to contain the settings for Terraform to use. And then I'm going to write here the providers. And then we're going to say we want to use AWS. And then we're going to specify where we want to get this from. And we're going to say hashicorp AWS. So I should make sure we spell source correctly. And then I'm also going to specify the required providers. So I'm going to say required version rather. And I'm going to set this to be 0.15.3, which is the version that I have installed. Now let's go through this code that we've just written. So this is the Terraform configuration, and we're essentially telling Terraform which provider that we're going to be using to deploy our infrastructure. And this is called the Terraform block here. And inside of the Terraform block, we specify the required providers. Now this block tells Terraform which providers we're going to be using. And the source attribute inside the AWS block tells Terraform where to download the provider plugin for AWS. Now, when you install Terraform, it only contains the basic functionality for Terraform, but it does not come with the code for any providers such as AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud Platform. So in the settings block of Terraform, you tell it which provider that you'll be using. In our case, we're going to be using AWS, and Terraform will download the code needed to deploy to AWS when you run the init command, as we'll see later on. And also in the source block, we can specify which AWS plugin provider that we want to use, which we haven't done here. And the version attribute is also optional, but you can use it to constrain the provider version so that Terraform does not install a version of the provider that does not work with your configuration. And if you don't specify a provider version as we've done here, Terraform will automatically download the latest version during initialization, and it will use that, which is what we're going to be doing in our case here. Now, after the required providers block, we create another setting, which is the required version. This block specifies the Terraform version that we want to use. Here we're specifying that we want to use a version of 0.15.3. Now it's important to keep in mind that the version you specify in this block needs to match the version you have installed, which you'll use to execute the Terraform configuration files. So if I go back to my terminal and then I check the Terraform version that I have, so I'm going to say Terraform -- version. Here you'll see that I have version 0.15.3 installed. Now what this means is that I can specify the version that I want to use when I'm running my Terraform config. So it's very important that the Terraform version that you have installed and the required version that you put in here match up. So I've just noticed that it needs to have required with a D. So just make sure that's spelled correctly. So it's required_version. Now, one last concept I'd like to bring to your attention is the syntax that HCL employs. In the Terraform block, we specify it by using a map-like syntax or an object-like syntax if you're familiar with JavaScript. And it uses curly braces. Then inside the block, we can specify either a key value syntax, as we've done with the required providers. Now, this is a pattern that you'll see again and again, and it's extensively used when configuring infrastructure with Terraform.